Hello, I'm Christina Tankersley. I am a project management professional, a PMP, and I have been teaching project management professional exam prep for over 6 years.
And I'm Chip Reeves, and I'm here to learn about project management.
All right, Chip, well, let's learn something.
All right.
Okay, so what we're going to learn in this course is basically the processes of project management. The cool thing about it is it works for any kind of project.
Okay.
So if you have a home project, if you have a manufacturing project, if you have an accounting project, this process works for all of those typical or different types of projects. So when we look at this, even though it is a specific process, you can manage it to make it work for your particular project.
Interesting, because I'm very disorganized, so the more management, the better.
All right. Well, let's take a look at our course outline.
Okay.
What we'll be doing is I need to get some basic terms in you and make sure that you understand how we use those terms. But once we do that, then we'll talk about the distinct processes of initiate, and then we'll go through the planning stages, and in particular, we'll talk about planning for time, cost, risk, and communication.
Okay.
Then we'll go through, okay, we've planned it, now what do we do? Now we need to manage it. So we'll talk about different things that you would want to do or utilize in managing the project. And then lastly, probably the one that people do the least is closing the project. There's actual steps to closing a project so that we can use the information in that project for future projects.
Interesting. Okay.
So the first thing that we need to do, Chip, is we need to define what is a project.
Okay.
What's the difference between just project work that we have to do and operational work that we have to do? So let's define project work first.
Okay.
Project work is a temporary endeavor. Believe it or not, it is supposed to end. It's not supposed to go on forever and ever. It has a finite beginning and end to it. Along with that, it should have some sort of outcome. It should have a result or a decision or a product or service that comes out of that project. I always joke around with people that we are in the business of change. So something has to have changed by the time that that project is over with. And the other thing associated with a project that we don't have listed here that I tell people is that it always requires resources. And resources could be in the form of money, people, things, buildings, equipment. It could be anything that we have to throw at it in order to get this project done.
Okay, so if I'm in IT and I have a client that wants us to install a new wireless network for them, that would be a project.
That would be a project.
But answering my email is not a project because it has no finite end in sight.
That's exactly right. It will go on forever and ever.
Unfortunately.
So when we talk about operational work is just stuff that you have to do all the time.
A normal day-to-day job.
Normal day-to-day job that will not end. It's really important when we talk about estimating later on that you recognize how much operational work you have and how much operational work the people on your project has, because we need to take that into consideration when we're looking at how long it will take them to do tasks on the project.
Right, so 100% of their time won't be on our project. They still have their normal stuff to do too.
That's exactly right. And we'll talk more about that later.
Okay.
So, temporary endeavor has a finite beginning and ending. It requires resources. We have a specific outcome that comes out of the project. Those are really the three main things that we're looking at when we're talking about a project.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good. So we talked about operational tasks. Operational tasks are typically things that are just ongoing and repetitive, and they usually produce the same outcome. When you go through your email, you've responded to those individuals, and then you go to the next responses. And it helps you perform day-to-day activities. So if I'm in a manufacturing environment, I may have certain cleaning duties that I may have with the equipment that I'm using, and I have to do that each day in order to maintain that equipment.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about operational task versus project task, notice here in the image that these just are cyclical when we talk about operational task. In project task, typically one task leads to another to an end. We are finished with that particular series of tasks. And we'll talk more about that sequencing later.
So we can complete a project, but I'll never complete my email.
That's right. You will always have email.
That's depressing, actually.
Well, it's a means to an end, right?
It is.
Okay, so that leads us to the project life cycle. The project life cycle is that we have a start, which is in initiation. We have to make a decision to do the project.
Okay.
There are lots of different options. Think about, in your IT business, there are multiple projects that you could take on, but you have limited amount of resources. So you have to decide which projects are most beneficial or have the highest return on investment for you and your organization.
True. So I have a whiteboard in my office that has a list of things that we need to do over the next month, but we haven't started those yet.
That's correct. And there probably are some other things that you would like to do, but you have to do the things that you need to do first before the things that you'd like to do.
Right. That's true.
So in the initial phase, we make those decisions. What are we going to do exactly? Which projects are we going to take on? And what sort of resources are we going to put towards those projects in order to get them done?
Okay.
Then we have this intermediate phase where we go through the process of planning and we go through the process of deciding exactly how we are going to accomplish that particular project with the resources that we do have. Because there's a limited amount of resources, whether it's people or money or equipment or time. There's a lot of different limitations that we're going to talk about later. Once we get through an intermediate phase, then we have a final phase where we are checking to make sure that we're accomplishing what we needed to accomplish. We're going through a lot of statistics in this phase. We're looking at, are we on track as far as time? Are we on track as far as the cost and that sort of thing? And then that takes us to the end of the project. So this is sort of an overview of the manageable sequences of how we will go through and manage our project.
Okay.
All right.
That makes sense.
Now, need for a project. Why do we need projects? Well, projects help us get things done. And if we don't organize projects in the way that I'm going to show you, then a lot of times they just keep going on and on and on, and there's no final ending to that particular project.
Yeah, I have that problem with a lot of my projects. I mean, we kind of know what needs to be done, but we kind of assign this person this task and assign this task to this person, and then when they get done with those, we kind of look and see what needs to be done next. And it seems very haphazard and random, and we're never sure when we're going to actually be done.
So that particular issue has to do with not assigning a sense of urgency in the form of deadlines. You have to assign those deadlines so that we have a sense of urgency that we have to get something done by a certain time in order to do the next things that need to get done and reach our goal. When we organize it in the format that we're going to talk about, it will help you get your projects completed in a timely manner, within budget, and meeting your scope. Those are the three main things that we're looking for in a project.
That all sounds really good to me.
All right, good. So we have other external things that affect that, though, right? We have our competitors. We have our changing budgets. We have markets. We have customers. These are all external things that will affect how we put our project together and, unfortunately, how we manage the project. Even though we might have planned it out a certain way, we may have to adjust because of these external considerations.
Okay.
All right?
That makes sense.
Okay. A stakeholder. A stakeholder is somebody who has interest in the project. This is a really important idea for you to grab onto. We'll talk about how we separate out different types of stakeholders and what sort of power they have over us in a project. But for now, we just need to know that a stakeholder is someone who has interest in the outcome. So when we think about your project that you mentioned earlier, the wireless network, who has an interest in the outcome of that?
My vendors, obviously, and then I guess the business owners, the client, and myself.
So when you think about all of those different stakeholders, do they have the same interest or do they have different interest associated with the project?
Oh, no, very different interests.
So for instance, your technicians, what is their primary interest in your project?
Well, I mean, their primary interest is maybe to get a paycheck. I like to think they also want to do a good job too.
Sure.
And help the client, but they're fundamentally working for a paycheck.
That's right. What about your client or customer? What is their primary interest in that project?
Well, the customer wants a better wireless network for their tenants. It's a residential facility. So they want to have a better experience, a better infrastructure, a better facility.
So I would consider that scope. What about the price of that? Do they have a concern in that?
Clients always have a concern about the price, sure.
Sure they do. So different stakeholders will have different interests and responsibilities associated with the project. And it's very important for us to consider that so that we can assign that to our stakeholders in a way that they know what their participation needs to be on the project. Setting expectations. This whole process is all about setting expectations with all of our stakeholders. And if we can do a good job at that, we can really stop a lot of potential problems that projects have before they even start.
Okay.
All right? So Chip, when we look at all of our different stakeholders, we have most of them represented here that you mentioned. The sponsor is someone, I jokingly say, they're the ones who write the checks.
Right.
So typically in an organization, this would be an executive who says, we're going to do this and I'm going to back it and this is where the budget's coming from. In your case with the network, you are more interested in the customer. The customer is the person who's going to write the checks, define the scope and that sort of thing. Then we have the project manager. That's you. You're going to be the one that is running the project and making sure that all these moving parts are coming together in a way that leads us towards our end goals. Then we have our project team. You mentioned that you have your technicians that are going out and installing and working with the plan in order to get this done. And then we have an entire project management team of, you may have people who are gathering requirements. You may have other people who are helping with customer service questions. And those would be part of your project management team. So these are different types of stakeholders that you might see on a project.
So what about my vendor, and my vendor's providing an outside network consultant to work with us? Where would they fall into this hierarchy?
That's a good question. So technically, I guess they could be part of your project team, but I would actually consider them to be something that is not listed here, which is a SME. A SME is a subject matter expert.
Okay.
And a subject matter expert would be someone or some place that we go. It could be a website, it could be a technical manual, but it's a place that we go to get information. And typically, a subject matter expert shortcuts having to do a lot of research or having to figure out things by ourselves through trial and error, and they help us. We take a hold of their knowledge, and they help us get things done a lot quicker.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right. What we've learned here is we've learned the basics of what a project is and what it's not. We've also learned about the overall process of running through a project, and we're going to talk about that more in detail. And then we've learned a couple of things like what a project stakeholder is and the different parts of that. You think you're ready to go?
I'm ready to go to the next step.
All right, let's do it.